Okay, so I think that this is just a general concept that is important to think about in both a broad and potentially personal or internal level, right? So this is something that applies to both the world and also to, I guess, you, right, yourself. Um, Once a cycle forms, it proliferates. So, if you look out at the world, you'll notice a lot of cycles, right? We have the cycle of life. We have the, what is it, rain cycle, right? The water cycle. I think it's water cycle. We have the water cycle. There's, I believe also you could think about like the carbon cycle. Pretty much anything you think about, it has a cycle, right? So we like our breathing, like you could think about our life is a cycle. Breathing is a cycle. The way that plants and trees grow is a cycle. The evolution of ecosystems is a cycle. The way that life evolves is a cycle. And, just matter in general is a cycle. In my opinion, I don't know if that's really the general idea right now, but in my opinion, that is the case. So what I'm saying is that, the reason they're everywhere in the universe is because once they form, once a cycle forms, it then continues itself, right? Because once the cycle, develops in such a way that a behavior repeats itself, that is going to continue to repeat itself, right? So if you think about in our bodies, cell division, right? So the process of cell division happened. But once it's a very unlikely thing in theory, right? But once it happened once, it will happen twice. And then it'll happen a third time. And it'll continue to do this. And so, while it is unlikely to occur, once it does occur, it proliferates itself. And so, everything that is long-lasting in the universe, everything that is, present, is existing, things that like I would say aren't man-made, right? If are human-made, we'll generalize it, human-made, right? So, things that humans have not constructed tend to fall into this thing. And what I want to highlight here is that a lot of stuff that humans have constructed does not fall into this thing. And that is exactly why so many things we construct fail. Thinking about empires do not run on cycles. And that is why there is the cycle of empire failures, for sure. That's definitely a thing. The cycle of empire rise and collapse is 100% a thing. But empires themselves do not last forever because they do not run on the principles of cycles. What they run on is, there's open and closed systems. And a closed system is self-contained, right? And so if you have a closed loop system, it proliferates itself. But an open system just constantly has to take stuff in. It doesn't reproduce for itself. It can't self-sustain. So it has to constantly consume resources from outside itself. And when you constantly have to consume resources from outside yourself, you constantly have to put more and more effort into getting those resources to sustain yourself, right? So if you think about it from this perspective, the more you eat, the more you need to eat to sustain your body. Because the more you eat, the more body mass you have. The more body mass you have, the more energy you need. The more energy you need, the more you have to eat. And so it's a reoccurring cycle that causes you to need to eat and eat and eat larger amounts in order to sustain yourself. Now, the reality is that you don't need to keep eating, actually, because this is just excess bloat. It's fat. It's not stuff that you really need. It's not essential, but your body is still trying to maintain it because it's a part of the body. The thing is that if you remove the excess, if you remove the fat, if you don't continue to eat and you allow yourself to, lose weight and reduce your body mass, then you get back to a point where you're healthy again and you can eat just as much as you need, and then you will use just as much as you need, and you will maintain a healthy body weight. So it's all in moderation, it's all in proportion. But a lot of systems in the human world, especially right now, capitalism and consumerism is just so rampant, and it is just so absurd what are like some of the stuff that you can buy. It's like, why is that even a thing, right? Why is that like, why does anyone need that? And that's the world that we live in, and it's very distant from the general laws of the universe. And the general laws of the universe exist not because, I guess just cause. No, it's because that's what lasts. It's only what survives long term that survives long enough to become what we call the principles of the universe, right? So things that we observe in everything, everything else has taken the hint and said, I should, try and follow suit. Not necessarily consciously, but, once they discover it, they go, oh, this is good. We're going to keep doing this, right? Whereas we have decided we are superior to the universe. The universe exists for us, not that we are just in the universe, right? We have put ourselves in the center stage and said, everything here is for me, rather than I am for everything, which is what is the actual truth. The truth is that everything is not there for you. You are there for everything. I don't know, that kind of gets into relativity, because you could really look at it as, you could say everything is moving or everything is still and I'm moving, right? There's that relativity there. And so you can have that relative shift with a lot of stuff, but I'm getting off track. So I'm going to continue reading. Something that replenishes itself endures. Once their cycle is created, there is no point you can stop and call it the beginning or the end. It all just is the cycle, a point in the loop that continues both back in time and forward without end. After its creation, what came before is no longer relevant or discernible. So this is kind of an interesting thing I'm trying to say here, because basically what I'm saying is this ties back to just the universe as a whole and infinity. And basically what came before the universe is really just a nonsensical question, because anything before the universe would still have to be the universe, and therefore it's not before the universe, right? And so there is no end or beginning to the universe, because if you found the end of the universe, whatever is next, right? Whatever comes after the end, whatever the end is within, right? Whatever you do, whatever is beyond the limit is not, it just proves that wasn't actually the limit. And so infinity builds in all directions, and it is not, and it seems, I would say, unlikely to be the case, but the universe at some point created itself, right? Why? It really, there's really not a good answer. There's really not a good answer. The answer is why not? Like, why wouldn't it create itself? And once that happened, everything could exist forever everywhere, because it all can be, because everything is relative. It's all like we are like this in the most like limiting way possible. You are infinite energy, because everything that you do, in my theory at least, trickles down into smaller and smaller scales. So every time I do this, all I did was punch my hand. It didn't really do a whole lot, right? But the energy that I transferred into my hand feels like it stopped in my hand, right? It hit my hand and that's where it stopped. But that transfer of energy is now going to continue to infinitum at smaller and smaller scales. It'll disperse and disperse and disperse, and it'll just slowly branch and trickle out. And the amount of energy that I just exerted into my hand was a practically finite amount, but at the same time, infinite. And it's in the same vein as saying there are infinite numbers between 0 and 1, right? Technically, all the numbers fit between 0 and 1. So, there's a limit to how much it is, but the amount of numbers that are there is infinite. You can always say, okay, well, what is half of a half? And what is half of a quarter? And what is half of an eighth? And what is half of a 16th? And what is half of a 32nd, right? You can keep going down, and there is always a smaller number, right? So you can always keep cutting it smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller to infinity. You will never run out of smaller numbers that it can then disperse into, right? So if you think about every time it branches off, so the energy that I put into my hand branches off, branches off, branches off, branches off, every single instant it cuts in half. It will cut in half forever. It will never stop dissipating that energy. In theory, because we don't believe that things go for infinity, which in my opinion is the most absurd theory to, it's more absurd to think infinity doesn't exist than that it does. And so that's how I feel, and that's how I'll stand. But what I'm saying is that once the universe happened, it really, thinking about that limit doesn't matter. It's formed and now it proliferates itself. And if you tried to go back in time and find out where it happened, you would never be able to find it. It could have been 2 seconds ago, right? The universe could have started 2 seconds ago, but there would be no way for me to prove it, because time is infinite in the past as well the future. It doesn't have an end in either direction. And so even though, for like the philosophical concept here, even though I have memories, I have an idea of what my past was, I have no way to prove it was actually real and not just a part of my mind, because all I have is the present moment right now. In theory, all of the past exists, but there is no way for me to prove the past exists, because even if I went back to the past, it would still be me in the present. You're not in the past. And so, a long tangent on what I was saying, right? Basically, what I'm saying is that everything in the universe follows this concept because it's what it created the universe in the first place. And then anything that lasts in the universe follows this principle because it allows things to continue. Things that form into cycles from, we'll call it the chaos. From the chaos, the randomness, a cycle forms. And once that cycle forms, it then proliferates itself. And so my argument against, the reason why I don't think that quantum theory works is because, okay, maybe before the universe existed, quantum theory was a thing, right? But the universe exists now. And so, therefore, that concept is no longer valid because there's no point in the universe where it's true anymore. There's no concept where that is true anymore because the entire universe has now formed. It's formed in this cycle, in this concept, in this pattern that has proliferated itself. And so the idea of this quantum randomness running the universe is no longer true. And so you can say, oh, well, that's the fundamental level of the universe because it came before the universe. But my argument then is that would then be the universe because that means that there's something that's within. So again, I'm not going to worry about it too much. This isn't even my physics series, but pretty much what I'm saying is that all things follow this behavior because that is what allows them to continue to be. If it didn't follow cycles, it doesn't last, right? Our body lives because we constantly are reproducing, well, our species continues because we reproduce, but our bodies themselves don't deteriorate because they're constantly reproducing new cells to replenish the old ones. And so this very long-winded, explanation, basically I already said humans don't follow this, but everything else does, and we should really pay more attention to that. Because if we develop systems that are a lot more inclusive, a lot more closed loops, that once we get them started, maybe it takes some resources, a significant amount of resources to begin it. But once it's begun, it can then, continue itself potentially to eternity. We should be pursuing that because that is what will last. These pursuing wealth and fame and all these constant produce, buy behaviors are not in line with this. We are the strongest and no one's stronger than us. We're going to take what we want because we can mentality is not going to work long term. And so there's just so many things that are just so disconnected about us, and we're just so blind to reality. No one looks at the world and thinks, maybe this is really wrong. Maybe there's a reason why, trees and, animals and all these things, have certain behaviors and, they kind of, work together and develop these, symbiotic relationships and cycles and stuff. Maybe there's a reason why that works. Maybe there's a reason why that lasts, and I just feel like we're just so blind to that fact, because we don't embody it. It's not in our way of life. And I don't really understand why that's the case. It's just so absurd. And so pretty much what I'm saying is that if we don't change our ways, we are not going to last. We are going to kill ourselves off because we are behaving in a manner that basically demands it. We're at a point now where resources are starting to get quite scarce. And the idea of resources being scarce is just so ridiculous because there's plenty to go around. We just make a whole lot of crap. There's so much stuff in this world we don't need, and we never did. And that's where our biggest problem is. Resources aren't scarce, we're just not using them effectively. And I don't know, I think that's another thing that's important to think about. How efficiently are you using your resources? Are you living in a closed loop system, way of life? You could also look at this from a financial perspective. Like, how much of the money you bring in is staying, right? You bring money in and it goes right out. Okay, well, that's not that's not a sustainable system. At some point the system's going to fail, whether it's you lose your job or you no longer are capable of doing it. That system will fail. So that's why, things like investing and like putting, like building value and assets and things like that is important, because you need something that you take the wealth in and you hold it, you maintain it. This constant flow of wealth, right? Like, I'm not saying you hoard it all and you don't do anything with it, but you use it, you use your money to make you money so that you don't have to constantly make as much money, right? And at some point, all the money that you're making is coming from the money you have. And you don't need to work to make more money. Your money is making you money, and that is when you win, right? Like, you can't run out of money so long as you don't spend too much money, or I guess something terrible could happen potentially. So I'm not saying it's impossible, but that's how people get wealthy and stay wealthy. And a lot of people don't bother doing that because it's not as fun, it's not as easy, to get there. But once you're there, it's done. You don't need to do anymore. Anyway, money's not the important thing here, but I just figured I'd put that out there. So, yeah. Peace out.